Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ASAP's Adaptation Co-Creation Series, the space where innovation and climate resilience meet. In today's session, we're going to be talking about resilient buildings, standards and tools for resilient buildings and beyond. Today's session is co-sponsored by the U.S. Green Building Council and the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. And before we dive into today's session, I do want to take a few minutes just to go through some housekeeping, introduce you to ASAP, one of your hosts here, and then we'll be moving more deeply into the purpose of the co-creation series and what you can expect from our conversation today. Just as a quick tech check, as folks are entering the room, you should find that your mics are muted. You're welcome to have your cameras off or on as you would like. And as this is a Zoom webinar platform, we encourage you to use either the chat or put questions directly into the Q&A function. We will have a discussion session following our presentations, but if you have clarifying questions that come up over the course of the presentations, don't be afraid to add them in the chat. We'll get to them either immediately following the presentation or as part of our Q&A session. You're also welcome to use the chat function as a way to communicate with one another, communicate directly with the presenters. I always like using the chat function as a way to sort of pass notes in class. I encourage you to take advantage of any and all of these different formats for getting to know one another and getting to know our presenters during the time we have together today. I'm Beth Gibbons. I'm the Executive Director at the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. I'm based in Southeast Michigan on ancestral and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe and the Wyandot people. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm joined here from ASAP by Brianna Nels, our ASAP program manager, who is going to be available for any questions that you may have about technical pieces that come up during the course of the webinar. So if you run into any snags, need some help getting reconnected, feel free to reach out to her via the chat, and she can offer you any tech support that you may need. Just a little bit about ASAP before we get going. ASAP is dedicated to connecting and supporting climate adaptation professionals to advance innovation and resilience across the adaptation field. At ASAP, we believe that climate change is a real and a serious danger to all sectors and systems, and that adaptation and resilience build stronger, more prepared communities, ecosystems, and economies. And when we center equity and justice in our adaptation work, we're able to expand the workforce which is taking on this effort, and we're able to ensure that while we plan for the future, we're reckoning with the past, which has led many people to be put into positions of a lack of security and further exposed to climate risk. We know that the climate change adaptation field is growing by leaps and bounds, and there are tons of incredible organizations doing this work. ASAP isn't here to reinvent the wheel. We bring together many disparate groups and start to unite them around shared principles, practices, and goals. We operate as a network, and in that, when you join ASAP, we expect you to come in and expect a community of reciprocity, open access, member-driven actions, trust, and a place where there's something for everyone, but not necessarily everything for everyone. And when you join the network, you participate in those values. ASAP has not just a diversity in its approach to building a network, but our members come from a diversity of places, from across North America and across 47 states. Our members represent the public sector, the private sector, nonprofit, and academia, and work across professional fields, as well as people coming into adaptation and resilience with lived knowledge, ancestral knowledge, and the experience of having confronted the impacts of climate change personally, and bring those lessons into their work so that we all can grow and develop our professional practice. Just a few notes on some upcoming events at ASAP. In just 2 weeks, we're going to be hosting our network meeting. This is an opportunity to connect, celebrate, and recharge. If you haven't been to a network meeting, I really recommend it. I know everyone is meeting virtually these days, but ASAP is an organization that was born into a virtual space. that has convened its members virtually since its inception. And we think that our network meeting does an exceptional job of really helping people to feel like they are supported and connected to one another through that time and space together. We also have a technical skills building opportunity coming up in October. This is the ASAP Private Sector Climate Service Providers Academy, where we aim to connect service providers with best available public data from regional public data centers, including the RESA programs, the Regional Integrated Science and Assessment programs of NOAA, the regional climate centers, and other public outfits, so that service providers are accessing best available information and also receiving training on ASAP's principles of practice. I believe Brianna is dropping the information on those into the chat, and so you're welcome to learn more about those on the website. ASAP's work is made possible through funding we receive from membership dues, and the dues include revenue from both individuals and organizations. Organizations which join ASAP extend their benefits to their members, clients, and colleagues, and ensure that they have a hand in building the adaptation field and benefiting from the resources and knowledge that come from membership. In addition to the logos of the organizations you can see here, recently joined include Jacobs, the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network, Rincon, and Yale University. This is a list that's always growing, and if you'd like to learn more about becoming an organizational member, you can reach out to me directly. I'm happy to build a customized package that will work for your institution, organization, or agency. Now, let us get into the Adaptation Co-Creation series itself. So the Co-Creation series is made possible through the year-long commitment of 2 organizations, Risk Solutions, the Resilience Infrastructure for Sustainable Communities cluster, which is a cluster of public and private sector organizations that are working on delivery and finance of market-based stormwater infrastructure assets in the Great Lakes region. In addition to work that they have done delivering the largest environmental impact bond in the country in Buffalo earlier this year, they also just released a design guide for green stormwater infrastructure best management practices this week. This guide is meant to be for the public sector, nonprofit managers, planners, and decision makers, and the toolkit contains guidance for 4 classes of best management practices, including background details, customization options, maintenance information, costs, specs, and design details. This program is also made possible through the support of WSP, and WSP's leadership in the climate adaptation and resilience field is well known, and it can be seen through their climate resilient sustainability practice line. They were named the Engineers Industry Best of in 2019 and 2020, and they continue working to advance their own work in TCFD so they can fully align with those TCFD disclosures internally. The Adaptation Co-Creation series is designed to highlight innovative and effective adaptation practices from diverse project teams and how justice and equity are woven throughout these practices. Our past webinars have featured how we can reduce flooding through updated design codes and standards, learning from Virginia Beach and Broward County, Florida. Innovations in adaptation finance, where we learned from Quantified Ventures, Joyce Coffey with Climate Resilience Consulting, and the Rhode Island Green Infrastructure Bank about how they're working to put dollars to work to build resilient infrastructure. We've talked about the corporate climate journey and understood better what TCFD means for corporations like Microsoft, American Family Insurance, and Northern Trust. And we've talked about the way that climate resilience can be a vehicle for resolving the political divide in states like North Carolina. And finally, we've heard about how we visualize change and how visualization tools can be really a resource for getting action on the ground. You can find information about all of these sessions on our website at adaptationprofessionals.org, or you can go straight to our YouTube channel where we have a playlist of all of our past co-creation sessions. And so today's session, which is number 7 in our series, really follows in a theme of programs which are highlighting what does this work look like on the ground. And in this co-creation session, we will highlight how certifying bodies, leading design firms, and data integration companies are helping builders, property owners, and developers to integrate climate resilience and risk into their projects and communities. We're going to begin by hearing from Karema, Seliem, and the Honorable Katherine Hammack from USGBC and GBCI, respectively. They'll share how climate resilience and social equity are part of USGBC and GBCI's suite of resources, including LEED and RELi standard. Next, we're going to hear from Doug Pierce, principal with Perkins and Will, and he'll be sharing a selection of case studies that show how those standards are brought to life through cutting-edge projects from across the country. And our final speaker will be Risk Footprint CEO Albert Slapp, who will be sharing his experience bringing climate information into the hands of property owners and how Risk Footprint is supporting developers and others seeking to achieve RELi standard and other key standards. We'll be following these presentations with a Q&A that will start with how we center social justice in our new design approaches, and then we'll talk about how we scale these kinds of design approaches from being exceptional case studies to the expected results of all of the work that we do. And so without further ado, I will stop sharing my slides and I'll invite Karema to bring up her slides as I read her bio and also Katherine's bio. So Karema brings extensive experience in architectural design, project management, green building, and environmental policy. In her current role, she oversees the technical development of the sustainable sites and integrative process credit categories for the LEED rating systems and provides technical support for social equity, climate adaptation, and resilient infrastructure strategies. She holds a Master's of Environmental Studies from the University of Pennsylvania and a BS in Interior Design from Drexel University. Karema serves on the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee for ASAP and is a member of APA, the American Planning Association, and AIA, the American Institute of Architects. She facilitates USGBC's Sustainable Sites Technical Advisory Group and Social Equity Working Group. Her presentation will be immediately followed by the Honorable Katherine Hammack, who is a former Assistant Secretary of the Army and is the Director of Special Projects at the Green Business Certification, Inc., GBCI. She was one of the founding members of USGBC, GBCI over 30 years ago, and she has many years of experience in energy, sustainability, utility, and infrastructure operations, and is working to advance tools to improve the built environment. Her focus on increasing resilience with the RELi program and reliability in power grids with the PEER program. Honorable Hammack is a graduate from Oregon State University with a degree in mechanical engineering, as well as a master's in business from the University of Hartford. Thank you two so much for being here. I'm happy to hand it over to you.
Thank you for having us, Beth. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes, it looks great.
Awesome, thank you. Hello, everyone. As you heard, my name is Karema Seliem. I'm the lead specialist at the U.S. Green Building Council in Washington, D.C. And in my role, I serve as the resilience and social equity expert on the technical development team. So today we're talking about resilience. It's a hot topic on the minds of local leaders these days, whether it's a mountain town battling droughts and wildfires or a coastal community responding to rising sea levels. Communities are increasingly aware of the importance of preparing for and adapting to changing conditions. It's important not just to be able to bounce back quickly after a crisis, but to recover in a way that increases sustainability and quality of life for all residents. USGBC is, or the U.S. Green Building Council, is working to transform the way buildings and communities are designed, built, and operated to encourage sustainable, equitable, and resilient practices around the globe. Resilience, much like sustainability, is not a static state, but instead is a descriptor of the functionality of a given system. So acknowledging that both returning to an existing state following a disaster or major event, and thus building towards a new, more adapted state, are important elements of community resilience. USGBC adopted the following definition. So resilience, according to USGBC, is the ability to prepare and plan for, absorb, recover from, and more successfully adapt to adverse events. An important step in operationalizing that definition of resilience in respect to both single events and long-term stresses is to establish a robust baseline of ongoing resilience efforts and the underlying social, natural, and economic functions of community systems. So USGBC Center for Resilience, which our website's available online, provides tools and resources that support the LEED Green Building Rating System and capture this idea and much of what is needed to be a resilient community. So let's talk a little bit about LEED. LEED, or the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, is USGBC's third-party certification system for green buildings at all scales, from private homes to large commercial skyscrapers. LEED criteria can be applied to new or existing buildings and offers 4 rating levels based on points gained for energy, water, waste, and other categories. LEED is the most widely used green building rating system in the world, available in over 170 countries, and an international symbol of excellence. LEED buildings are a critical part of addressing climate change, enhancing resilience, and supporting more equitable communities. And LEED project teams attest to the LEED process, including purposeful design and third-party validation, and they've attested that it's helped project teams achieve critical resilience outcomes. LEED credits are designed with resilience at the forefront to reduce risks and protect a system's infrastructure. In fact, a UT San Antonio study found that most LEED v4 credits help to increase resilience among several natural disasters. They found that 64% of LEED credits and prerequisites enhance resilience of building against flooding, 63% against hurricane and typhoon, and 61% against tsunami. But don't just take their word for it, try it yourself. The LEED Climate Resilience Screening Tool for LEED v4 projects offers a framework to help identify climate-related effects on projects and to determine effective strategies for enhanced resilience. The tool helps project teams by evaluating the resilience potential of each credit and identifying potential opportunities. And speaking of tools, ARC is our state-of-the-art platform that collects, manages, and benchmarks LEED building data to improve sustainability and resilience performance. And late in 2020, USGBC announced a collaboration with Coastal Risk Consulting, which you'll hear about from Albert Slapp later on in this session. Integration of risk footprint with LEED Online and ARC will give any project new tools to assess vulnerability to risks. LEED credits themselves also encourage resilient design. Through integrative design and key credits, LEED guides project teams to invest in climate adaptation strategies to enhance building and community resilience. LEED buildings are driving resilience-enhancing designs, technologies, materials, and methods by integrating practices such as the use of durable materials, thoughtful site selection, rainwater collection, demand response, grid islanding, maximal energy efficiency, on-site renewable energy generation, and more. And this is because LEED explicitly promotes resilience practices by means of its prerequisites and credits, some of which are listed here. Much like our certified resilient buildings, LEED's development process ensures it remains flexible and adaptable to market changes. The Union of Concerned Scientists defined the resilience gap, which is shown on the left here, as the degree to which a community is unprepared for damaging climate-related events. In version 4.1, LEED seeks to fill that gap. In the newest version, we integrated changes to the rating system that would help project teams fill that gap by focusing on more adaptation strategies in addition to mitigation measures already in place. For example, in the integrated process credit, we added a site selection and social equity to the list of areas to analyze. In rainwater management, we added new exemplary performance threshold, which takes into account future precipitation rates. And in protect or restore habitat, there are new requirements for pollinator gardens so that we create habitat for insects which are losing their habitats every day. LEED projects that are certified or seeking certification can take advantage of a dual pathway to recognize their leadership in promoting resilience. Projects can either seek RELi certification in addition to LEED certification, or implement the LEED resilience design pilot credits. The pilot credits have been harmonized to align with RELi, which you will hear about later in this presentation from Katherine. So let's dive into them. The LEED resilience design pilot credits are available to all new construction projects seeking to certify through LEED v4 or LEED version 4.1. And while typically earned as part of a project's initial design phase, these pilot credits can be achieved at any time during the LEED process for new construction projects. So LEED Pilot Credit 98, Assessment and Planning for Resilience, encourages project teams to determine potential vulnerabilities at the project location. To earn the credit, project teams must identify risks related to the effects of climate change, and risks that must be considered as part of the credit include sea level rise, extreme heat, and more intense winter storms. In Pilot Credit 99, Designing for Enhanced Resilience, it ensures that risk-related information collected as mandated by Credit 98 are taken into account via mitigation measures. The credit states that project teams must address either one or two top hazards identified with 1 point available for each. This tiered approach allows teams to earn acknowledgement for mitigating multiple types of risks. And Pilot Credit 100, Passive Survivability and Backup Power Disruption, centers around the concepts that buildings should be able to provide safe shelter for occupants during a power outage, as well as be able to provide backup power. Currently, nearly 400 projects have registered to pursue the pilot credits. LEED for Cities and Communities is a pilot certification program that supports progress towards better, more resilient cities. So it's available through the ARC Performance platform, and it goes further than the building scale and provides cities with solutions for measuring and managing energy and water use, human experience, waste production, and transportation usage on a city scale. In 2019, USGBC published a super helpful guide, Measuring Resilience, a guide to measuring community resilience with version 4.1 for cities and communities. This guide supports local leaders seeking guidance for measuring and improving community resiliency. And using the newest version of LEED, it identifies resilience strategies and best practices within the rating system for existing cities. And it utilizes resilience framework developed by FEMA and NOAA, and therefore communities in the US that are already tracking their metrics and project progress using LEED for Cities and Communities can use this guide to further align their efforts with existing national and state level emergency management assessment and reporting structures. In USGBC strategic planning guidelines, we stated that we will continue to respect all communities and cultures and aspire to be a fully inclusive movement that embraces opportunities which broaden and expand our reach through partnerships and initiatives. By equity, we mean equal opportunity in a safe and healthy environment, and we seek to address disparities and inequitable distribution of goods and services and amenities. So Black and Brown people are the populations that will be most impacted by climate change related events. And USGBC recognizes this and recognizes that they cannot be left out of the resilience conversation. So you can overlay any red line map of any major city in the US and lay it on top of a climate impact map, and you'll find the same communities of color that were intentionally segregated by the US government are feeling the worst of climate change. This was intentional and done with surgical precision. So how we act now must be done with similar precision, and these communities need to be engaged in the design process. That's why we've done the following. In the LEED Green Building Rating System, we've included a series of social equity credits and other equity-related credits you can see here. We also have a LEED project team checklist for social impact that is now included in our integrated process credit within the rating system. Most recently, to assist building teams during COVID-19 pandemic, USGBC introduced LEED Safety First pilot credits to further address the critical building operations and planning across cities and communities. The Safety First pilot credit for social equity and pandemic planning encourage resilience for all by requiring project teams to consider equity implications while identifying risks and vulnerabilities and assessing pandemic preparedness and response. In LEED for Cities, we included the quality of life category, and this category encourages leaders to assess their socioeconomic and demographic conditions, make improvements to the communities that support education, prosperity, income equality, social equity, public health, and environmental justice, human rights, and community engagement. And USGBC has done all of this because our vision is that buildings and communities will regenerate and sustain the health and vitality of all life within a generation. USGBC wants to ensure that we're all in. And that's all for me. Thank you for the time. Please reach out to our team today to get started with version 4.1 and visit us at usgbc.org or email me for more information. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karema. That was terrific. I think we're going to go now to Katherine Hammack. And Katherine, are you able to take control of the slides?
And that unmute button always helps.
Oh, it does. It's a tricky one, though.
It is. But thank you very much, Karema. And also thank you, Beth, and the American Society of Adaptation Professionals for the opportunity to talk about the tools that GBCI and USGBC have to help you increase resilience in the built environment. Let's see if I can change slides. There we go. Karema talked about LEED, and LEED was developed to bring better definition to green buildings and to sustainability. That was its foundation. But the RELi program really focuses on resilience, and that's where I want to take us, is to that narrow focus. And although many consider sustainability and resilience to be synonymous, they're indeed different. Resilience focuses on the capacity of a system to deal with change and to continue to develop, while sustainability is the ability to meet the needs of the present without compromising that of future generations. And although different, resilience does aid sustainability, and both are very strategic and key management strategies. So the RELi program that I'm going to be talking about provides strategies toward socially and environmentally resilient building and design. Now, there is some overlap with LEED, as RELi layers on top of the LEED sustainability strategies. And as Karema talked about, many of the LEED strategies do contain resilience aspects. So LEED contributes to resilience, but RELi takes you further than that. Now, Karema talked about the LEED resilience pilot credits, which were taken directly from RELi. And you can, if you're achieving the pilot credits, that helps you meet some of the requirements within the RELi program. So the first one is that assessment and planning for resilience, or pilot credit 98. And this talks about the need to determine potential vulnerabilities at the project location, and encourages identifying and measuring the risks of those and considering them in relationship to climate change. And so there's many risks that a project can face, but requirements within RELi are knowing those risks, assessing the risks, and then designing toward them. And then credit 98 or 99 really is implementing those. So don't just study something, but implement the resilience in the program. And then the last one, which is credit 100, is addressing survivability. And some may think, well, isn't that what all buildings do? But this anticipates that you're going to be without power, or maybe you can't leave the building. So you need to have some sort of passive survivability. You need some backup power. Part of this includes the ability to open windows, because if you think of many of the new buildings, especially high-rise buildings, you can't open those windows. So how can you get ventilation? So it really walks you through strategies on passive survivability. And passive survivability and backup power, then in the RELi program, you delve into that a little bit more. Now, I talked about a little bit about the RELi credit categories, but let me explain them a little bit more. I mean, there's 8 categories overall, starting with a panoramic approach, which is where any project starts for new construction, is really a thorough evaluation of the site and what's available. And then you go into hazard preparedness. And so hazard adaptation, which I'm going to talk a lot about, is adapting to the hazards and surviving the hazards. But preparedness is, what do you do if there's a hazard going on? And we know that that is an issue right now that many of those in the Southeast are facing. And then in the West, they're facing it in regards to smoke and wildfires. Energy, water, and food, and materials and artifacts should be familiar to those who are familiar with the LEED program overall. Now, when I was talking earlier about this overlap, you can see that the overlap is in several categories. It's not just one. There's a lot of overlap in the energy and water and the materials. But the LEED and the LEED for Cities program helps meet several of the prerequisites in the RELi program. RELi is an 800-point program, so it gives you the ability to dive deep into strategies and identify those that are most applicable to your building category type. There are 4 levels of certification, just like there are in the LEED program. And again, gives you the ability to identify those strategies and the different risk based upon your geography and your geology, because we know no one's going to achieve all of these points, because you might not be in an area located near the coastal areas of the United States. So coastal risk is not a hazard that you need to adapt to, but maybe extreme rain is something that you do need to adapt to. So the RELi program gives you a lot of strategies to identify and to work through and to think about. Now, as I said, hazard adaptation is a big focus of the program. And as you can well imagine, these include strategies and actions that can be designed and engineered to reduce risk and future losses from hazards, such as a natural disaster, civil unrest, extreme weather events, and other emergencies. And in this area, the first 2 requirements are the same as the LEED pilot credit, designing for enhanced resilience. The third is also a LEED pilot credit covering passive survivability and backup power. And then the 4th one addresses extreme weather. We've seen more intense weather events due to changing weather and climate, especially in the West where I'm located. Wildfire risk is increasing, where drought is more frequent. And then you get into the various credits. These are strategies covering advanced emergency operations. How do you operate during an emergency? Your transit systems and transportation system protection, environmental protection and remediation for open spaces, parks, and preserves. A lot of detail here and a lot of strategies and opportunities to increase resilience. A fundamental requirement for resilience and hazard adaptation is an understanding of the level of risk that a climate hazard poses to the project or community. And just a quick preview of the tool risk footprint that Albert's going to be talking about later in the program. That amalgamates data from multiple sources and features high resolution visuals of a project's risk. And the risk footprint tool also gives you the foundation from which to base your resilient design and your resilient strategies and your adaptation strategies, building on a great foundation to inform your risk mitigation and adaptation. Now, studies have shown that a building or a project is only as resilient as the community around it. There's a significant positive correlation between social cohesion and resilience, because the project's resilience is dependent in many ways upon the community resilience, whether it's an ongoing process of adaptation, the simple absence of negative effects, or the presence of a range of positive attributes. So this focus is to improve the net quality of life for all communities affected by the project that you're working on and mitigate the negative effects. Stakeholder engagement early in a project's phase, planning phase, means getting everyone at the table at the beginning. The project team can achieve good project alignment with community plans, recognizing, scope of the project is always a limiting factor, but it also gives you the opportunity to learn about things that can contribute to resilience in your project. There's always that unknown, and until you get a group of stakeholders together, you don't really know what is already there that you could be duplicating. So projects can facilitate that social and economic interconnectivity and cohesion through the built environment in ways like improving public spaces, developing new spaces like parks or plazas or recreational facilities to enhance community livability. And the intent of the only requirement in this category is to improve the net quality of life of the communities affected by the project. All relevant community plans need to be reviewed and verified through the stakeholder impact, and recognizing that the strategies are wide and diverse. They cover things, and Doug's going to go into a couple of these when he talks about projects he's worked on, but designing the project in a way that maintains local character of the community, that it may improve access to non-motorized transportation or public transit, expanding citizen participation with public amenities and areas that are open to the public and not blocked off. Also developing local skills and expanding long-term employment, regionally sourced materials, and really supporting and stimulating sustainable growth and development at a community level. Now, while RELi is still in the pilot mode as a pilot program, the rating system guideline is a free downloadable document and a great place to get started, gbci.org/RELi. And a review of these guidelines will introduce you to the strategies that can be approached to help improve the resilience in the built environment and the resilience in the community surrounding the project. There's also education on the programs that's available at education at USGBC. And so with that, I'll hand it back to you, Beth.
Thank you so much, Karema and Katherine. I think that was such a great orientation to USGBC, to LEED, to RELi, and really, I see some questions coming in the chat in the Q&A. I think I'd like us to keep going because our presenters who are going to speak next are going to really be showing us what do these tools look like when they're put into practice. But I encourage Katherine and Karema, if you're able to get into the Q&A and could offer any answers via the Q&A or chat directly, please feel free to do so. And if not, we can come back to those when we get to our discussion period. So Doug, I hope that you're able to start bringing your slides up. I'm going to begin reading your bio now. So Doug Pierce is a pioneering architect, speaker, and writer with a passion for integrating art and science through poetic innovation. He has over 30 years of experience in sustainable, resilient design that includes planning, architecture, and policy work. He's led the conceptual design and lead planning for multiple certified projects, including one of the Upper Midwest's very first LEED Platinum certified projects, Great River Energy Headquarters, and one of the first 2030 compliant projects in the country. He was a technical lead for the Climate Ready DC Adaptation Plan, winner of the 2017 C40 Cities Bloomberg Philanthropies International Cities for Tomorrow Award. Doug is now defining a new integrative framework for designing for sustainable design through development of the RELi Resiliency Action List and National Consensus Standard. RELi was launched in 2014 and adopted by USGBC in 2017 as part of their family of standards, and Doug is here to bring it to life for us. So Doug, thank you so much for presenting.
Beth, thanks you so much for the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure. And Katherine and Karema, thanks for giving that great sort of rundown on LEED and its relationship to resilience and on RELi. So I would like to walk through a couple of case studies. I'm going to do one at the building scale and one at the urban planning scale. So the first one is Christus Spohn Shoreline Hospital. It's in Corpus Christi, Texas. And I'm going to walk through maybe some regional risks and a design response for that project. So just a little bit on Corpus Christi. It's about a 550,000 square foot new construction and renovation hospital. It's a trauma center. It's got a couple of hundred new beds and a 10-story patient tower and a new central plant. So that gives you a feel, just a general feel for the project. Now, this slide that I'm showing you right now is probably the most important slide I can show you out of everything I have to share. Now, as most of you know, the thing about this slide is this shows people starting really early on resilience. So what this is a shot of our workshop where we have the CEO, the CFO, all the engineers, structural, civil, mechanical, electrical, the facilities folks, the designer, the project architect. Everybody was in the room, and we spent about 4 hours on a very early workshop going through the topics, absolutely focused on resilience. And that was an essential space in terms of getting the project set up and running in a really great direction, right? Because if you don't start early, you'll miss the key components. You won't get the things you need in the budget. Everyone on the webinar right now, I'm sure you've all experienced that. So a couple of really interesting things that came out of this workshop, probably a really good sort of little tale, was as we started the workshop, we got into it, and the hospital said, you know, we want to be able to operate in a Category 4 hurricane. It's a pretty robust statement, right? They wanted to operate during a Category 4 hurricane and be up and running. So we started testing that out. We went through the topics and the issues. Can we do it structurally? Yes. Can we get the skin strong enough to do that? Yes, we can. Backup power. Everybody could start to answer that until I asked the question, can you flush the toilets in a Category 4 hurricane? And that's when the room stopped, and the response was, no, we actually won't be able to do that, because the wastewater plant that's many, many blocks away is going to go down during a Category 3 hurricane. So that sort of paused the entire room. And everybody said, well, are we going to try and do that? And at that point, the conversation was, well, we may have to do Category 3. At the end of the day, they sort of landed at Category 3. They did provide some provisions for waste management on site. But the big story here is that you really do have to look at a pretty wide range of field and things that are well beyond your project site, even if you're doing a building, to really understand what your resilience impacts are and really sort of test things out. That's one takeaway. The other one is it's really helpful to have that local knowledge, those specific people that are right there, because resilience is incredibly specific to place. So from there, just a little bit on local regional risks. Corpus Christi is considered one of the riskiest places in the country. Dallas is sort of like #1, right, in the whole Gulf area, because they've got everything: hurricanes, tornadoes, hail, wind, drought, floods, industrial disasters, just about everything you can imagine. So from here, I'm going to just kind of go through some numbers and some components so you can get a feel for what this project looks like. And this actually is the first pilot project for RELi, and we're working with Katherine and GBCI right now to sort of finalize that pilot certification. The hospital's been up and operating for a while. Yeah, so I just want to share some numbers and some details. So once again, it's set up to remain operable during a Category 3 hurricane, and it's at the choice of the administration whether they're going to try and stay open in a Category 4. It could handle a Category 4 unless certain kinds of circumstances might come up, and they could choose not to do that. It's got backup generation for that with power for 4 days. A lot of people think hospitals always have that. They don't. It's got 4 days of food, always on site, and the capacity to add 5 days if they have a little planning time for, say, a hurricane. And there's 12 gallons of emergency water per patient held on site as well. And there's a whole series of critical departments that can remain open during a Category 3. And you can see the list: emergency department, intensive care, surgery unit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of those things, most of those functions are up on the second floor. The first floor power, all that stuff can be shut down in case of a really serious storm surge, although actually the site is pretty high. The project is almost 40 feet above sea level. So even with a Category 4 hurricane, it's more than likely fully up out of the storm surge, and it can handle a certain amount of sea level rise into the future as well. It's designed for extreme rain events, not necessarily just hurricanes, but of course, hurricanes bring a lot of rain. So the central plant, once again, is on the second floor. It's got oversized roof drains, tanks underground, basically stormwater tanks that hold the water and then release it slowly. A lot of permeable surface around the building to help keep water sort of running into and infiltrating if there is a big rain event right in the immediate area. And then the skin is really tough. The exterior skin is designed to withstand 160-mile-an-hour wind. It won't take, for example, a F5 tornado. It's not a storm. Really tough. That's 40 miles per hour greater than the local code for hurricanes. And then it has some features to it. For example, it has an emergency command center that can be set up, and that's actually set up for the physician's lounge. The physicians know where that is. There's no chance they're going to not know where the emergency command center. Almost everybody knows where it's at, and it's a good space to use for that. And then there's two large community meeting rooms at the ground floor that can be switched over to emergency shelters in case of a disaster. Obviously, for a hurricane, that wouldn't be a choice, but for other kinds of disasters, that works, because they actually have a lot of risk from industrial disasters. So the ambulance bay, the courtyard for the ambulance bay can all be converted into a big trauma center, kind of outdoor disaster center for industrial disasters. The administrative offices can be converted over to mass casualty inpatient beds. There's a lot of things that are done to make it sort of mass casualty appropriate. And then even though this was designed prior to COVID-19, it has a floor that's dedicated to epidemics. You can isolate the emergency department from the rest of the hospital's air distribution. There's a big suite of rooms that can be fully isolated. And once again, there's always 4 days of food supplied in case there's sort of an emergency lockdown of the space, or they need to isolate for civil unrest. Separate elevators, a pretty wide range of things that are done to really make this hospital robust. I'm going to switch gears and scale and do an overview of a Midwestern small city. This is a resilience plan. It's not yet published, so I'm gonna leave the name out and the exact location, but I think it's a good representative example of a 75,000 population city, and the kinds of things they would face in the Midwest from a resilience standpoint. So, some of the risks, and a lot of people don't really imagine the Midwest as maybe having a lot of risks, thinking of it as being hurricanes, the risks on the coast, or fires on the West Coast. But the Midwest has a pretty significant set of risks. One of them is actually very heavy precipitation risks. The Northeast has seen an increase of about 71% of extreme events over the past 50 years, the Midwest about 37. You can see on this graphic in the lower right, East Minnesota has had 3 1,000-year rain events layered right on top of each other in the past decade. And that actually changes the statistic on what is a 1,000-year event. And this actually happens to be a rain event in 2012 from Duluth, Minnesota. This event, just extreme rain, did this to the street. This is the event that got me to switch just from carbon mitigation and climate change sort of mitigation to adaptation. This is Route 66, just outside of St. Louis. This is where I grew up. I have never seen events like this when I was younger. This has happened twice, this type of flooding event. This is the Mississippi River. You can see these locks and dams are all completely submerged. This is 2019. This is the Midwest derecho. You probably missed this if you're not from the local area. It happened in 2020 at the depths of the pandemic. And this is not a tornado. This is straight line winds of 140 miles an hour that were created by sort of climate change supercharged thunderstorm event, quite literally. And then, of course, the agricultural farm industry is really hard on biodiversity. We've got pollinators that are in serious trouble because of a loss of habitat and because of insecticides. And like a lot of places, of course, we have economic inequity. Middle income has lost a lot while the upper income has gained. There's a big differentiation between the white population and the Black population. Much of that is systemic. It's been an issue for a long time. And of course, in the depths of the pandemic, that showed up in a really serious way in Minneapolis. So those are some of the risks that are out there. And I'm going to slide through a few of the things that sort of are in a resilience plan for a 50 to 75,000 person city. So one of the things we did is we did a lot of outreach to the community as we started putting this together, and we got back feedback from the cohorts in the community as to what they thought was the most important. Now, this community has both a college and it has a farm community and sort of rural community that's associated with it. So there are very, very different perspectives about what's critical and what's not critical. Everybody agreed that supporting local business and jobs was really important. That's the green bar at the very top. Attracting business talent with local amenities, once again, the green bar, it was really high sort of shared concern or desire for that. Now, as you work your way down, you'll see the blue bars start popping up. Those blue bars indicate people saying, oh, that's not really so critical. It's not so important. So you kind of work your way down: a diverse local economy, walkability, bikeability, adaptation to rain events. You can see where that's starting to show up. Cleaner renewable fuels, we're getting a little more disagreement. Extreme weather preparedness is, getting even more, actually. Pollution reductions, socio and economic inclusion. So you can start to see the differences. So one of the things that we really started looking at hard was, how do we find common ground? Because there was very clear distinctions that we were hearing both within city council and leadership, the community, et cetera. So we started looking for a language of common ground, an approach of common ground. So we actually structured the plan to focus and start with local economics and community, even though the plan that we're working on was originally birthed as a climate action plan. We started with local economics and community. That's where the plan starts if you go into the plan. And we followed that with weather and nature. And you'll note it is not climate and ecology. It's weather and nature. That was very intentional because those words are much more common ground words, and energy and mobility. And we've made a lot of selections like that over a long period of time, trying to sort of allow people to enter the dialogue without being immediately pushed away. So affordable housing was very important. We actually shifted the dialogue and pushed that through the lens of a concept called missing middle housing from Opticos Design. And that's, the graphics, the concepts around it are all very open and amenable to a lot of people. And then we instead of using words like affordable housing, we started using words like economically diversified, context appropriate. And we actually didn't use, for example, social equity. We used promoting fair and equitable access. So we gave a lot of thought to how we describe things. The other thing we did is we looked at co-benefits very heavily. And we used a lot of sort of basic Ian McHarg sort of approach where we started layering different topics together so people can see how things intersect. So you can see on this map, we've got mobility hub and transit issues, green infrastructure, recreation, mixed use opportunities are starting to show up. And then we basically pushed some of those topics to the back and focused on blue-green corridors, but you can still see where the mixed use opportunities are. You can see how the transit intersects, how those things come together, right? And then we focused in on natural areas. And once again, you can see the relationships and stormwater and extreme rain management. So we're layering together everything from economics to biodiversity. And we made that a real clear underpinning theme in the plan. The other thing we did is we worked on measurable risks and we stayed away from a lot of projections and modeling. So we used historical data. We've been in a situation now for decades where change has been happening and you can actually measure that change and it's notable. So here's an example. The upper Midwest has experienced a 42% increase in the amount of extreme rain during extreme rain events. And then, of course, we included a variety of strategies in the plan, but that measurement was really important. We also shifted the dialogue on energy from being about sort of pollution reductions, although that's a huge conversation. We didn't start there. We started with low-cost electricity and fuel because the world has come to a place now where wind power and utility scale solar is far cheaper to build and operate than coal and nuclear. So we just started with this is the best economic approach. And we shifted the dialogue using liquid and gas fuels. We had a conversation about those, but we touched on biomethane and hydrogen production and using switchgrass, which is native to the upper Midwest, to provide biodiversity and feedstock for creating biomethane. We switched the dialogue on greenhouse gases to heat trapping gases. Not a huge shift, but it's not an immediate trigger word. We used NASA information from the Jet Propulsion Lab to support that, not the UN. We talked about separating natural and human impacts on temperature, not climate. And we shifted over to showing changes around temperature through plant hardiness zones, as opposed to modeled projections of changes. Once again, the plan's not published yet, so in a couple of months, we're probably going to have a really good feel for how this shift in dialogue has been really accepted by the community. And hopefully I can share that back with you, and hopefully it'll be really good news. So that's what I have, Beth, and I'm happy to pass this along.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Doug. I really appreciate that. And I think that did a great job of demonstrating what's possible with these standards. I want to keep us moving. I know there are questions. I encourage you, Doug, as I encouraged Katherine and Karema. If you look to the Q&A and to the chat, feel free where there are questions that you can add responses to do that. If there's things you want to make sure to draw into our open conversation following Albert's presentation, then tee those up and I'll make sure we get to them. And so our next presenter is Albert Slapp. Albert is the president and co-founder of Coastal Risk Consulting, a flood, natural hazard, and climate change risk assessment technology company located in Boca Raton, Florida. Coastal Risks technology empowers individuals, businesses, and governments in the US and globally to accelerate resilience. Coastal Risk invented the new risk footprint cloud-based risk assessment platform that holistically assesses the risks of any property in the US in seconds. Prior to launching Coastal Risk, Mr. Slapp was a nationally recognized environmental trial attorney and law professor. Over the years, he used America's environmental laws to protect public health and the environment by stopping water and air pollution, toxic waste dumping, and by requiring local governments to replace aging and polluting sewer infrastructure. For his outstanding legal work, Mr. Slapp was the recipient in 2014 of the prestigious Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Defender of the Everglades Award. And so, Albert, have you been able to bring your slides up?
That's just a second.
All right, here they come. Oh, that looks great.
Great. Well, thank you, Beth, and thanks everyone for your attendance. Wow, Karema and Katherine and Doug, that was really great. And so what I want to speak about today is closing America's resilience deficit. And really, what Doug is talking about is amazing. It just needs to become the rule and not the exception. So I think I would be remiss without talking and sending our prayers to the folks in Louisiana and Mississippi who are trying to deal with the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. And so this is an image off the news from yesterday when the National Guard and others could get into areas in Louisiana that were not protected by the levees, such as Laplace. And I put the image on the left and also our instant storm surge modeling on the right. And this is available. It's a tool, but it's available in seconds for every property in the country. But just shows you that we know where these risks are. So it's not a matter of if, it's really a matter of when. I did this slide. We all did our slides just a few weeks ago, and it's just before Ida. So, getting this off of NOAA's website, there 298 weather and climate disasters, over $1 billion since 1980, almost 300 events, and nearly $2 trillion. And then NOAA says that not including the Western wildfires, which now they're evacuating Lake Tahoe today, that as of July 9th, there were 8 disasters over $1 billion. But of course, we have to add more wildfires, and we have to add Ida to that. So it's just pretty much a big mess, and it's getting worse. So we have a resilience deficit. Other reports say that 57% of structures in the US, homes, schools, hospitals, office buildings, are located in hazard hotspots, and several, more than 1 million buildings lie in 2 or more hotspots. Here's one that I think is just astounding to me, that in the last 10 years, there's been about 5 million NFIP federal flood policies for homeowners, static, maybe declining a little bit in the last decade. But studies, including from our company, show that there's probably 40 to 60 million homeowners at risk of flooding. So it's not just on the coast, it's everywhere it rains, it can flood. We're going to be talking about this a little bit, about drivers of resilience. And certainly US Green Buildings Council and GBCI are one of those drivers with LEED and RELi. But there is no real driver in commercial real estate transfers. There's about 1 million commercial real estate transfers a year of properties over $1 million. There's a lack of legal standards for physical climate risk assessments. You have the phase 1 ESAs, environmental site assessments, that go back to 1980 and 1986 with the Superfund law, CERCLA, and RCRA, but there are really no requirements right now. And there's generally a lack of private risk mitigation investments, both in residential and commercial, unfortunately. We don't have government tax and financial programs that really incentivize largely risk mitigation. We have a lack of risk education and communication. I call this the human element. And some commentators have said that we're drowning in data and starved for knowledge. So there is a human element to this. Simply providing information about risks is not enough. It's just not going to be enough to really move the needle on resilience. We know that climate adaptation and resilience is going to reduce death and damages and losses, and it's going to bring us substantial economic benefits. But progress has been painfully slow. And that's what we're trying to do with this new tool and trying to get it integrated with LEED and RELi. So when we try to close the resilience deficit, we need individuals, businesses, and governments to modify existing behaviors and adopt new ones. And they're just not doing it fast enough. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to have the vulnerability assessments and tools. We're going to have more education. We're going to have to find resilience enablers for specific groups, groups of resilience enablers for homeowners of different economic strata are going to be different than real estate investment trusts and different than industrial, different than government buildings. And we're going to have some regulatory drivers, which there really aren't now. So financial support and incentives from government pre-disaster, not just post-disaster, but pre-disaster. And then finally, incentives for insurance companies and lenders, which generally do not exist at the present time. So this tool, risk footprint, and it really falls into the category of due diligence. And due diligence is involved in buying properties, selling properties, investing in properties, lending on properties, ensuring, protecting them, and disclosures. So the normal due diligence, as I said, in commercial involves a phase one environmental site assessment, a property condition assessment. It may be a quick look at FEMA flood maps, but we need to get more advanced in the quantification of risk, the hazards, the vulnerability, and the sensitivity or the materiality of an investment to a town, to a company. A materiality will be different. So we have a tool, which Katherine and Karema mentioned, risk footprint, that quickly enables owners, developers, investors, lenders, et cetera, to identify properties that are particularly vulnerable to risk by tying the hazards and risks to individual buildings. It provides vulnerability and sensitivity analysis. Why? Why are we doing this? So that the resources, whether it's a government, whether it's a healthcare system, whether it's a commercial real estate, can focus their resources, because resources are always limited, on vulnerable sites for further risk management. We want to put this in a context because, as I said in the beginning, the risk assessment data and mapping modeling methods are just part of it, but it's not going to really move the needle of resilience. The image on the right you see here is a self-closing flood barrier in a high-rise building with an underground parking garage in Houston during Hurricane Harvey. You can see the water on the right and a little bit of wetness on the left. So the self-closing flood barrier, which is resilience, again, it's not all of the things that Doug mentioned about this new medical complex, but most of the buildings that we have to deal with in terms of becoming a more resilient society are existing buildings that can be retrofitted with something. So we have to look at practicality. So we model a portfolio of properties, we drill down, we focus the microscope on a building. Damage loss means the issue of cost benefit and return on investment. Nobody's going to put a barrier like this in for $150,000 or whatever it costs without doing some sort of a cost benefit analysis. So there has to be a context for this. I'm not going to go through this. We only have a certain amount of time, but there's 15 different risk categories, from flooding, natural hazards, extreme weather, climate change, that are included in the risk footprint. We also have methodologies to look at the economic loss, the potential, called the maximum probable loss for different hazards at particular sites, to do the cost benefit analysis. And again, this is very important. So there's the hazard, there's the vulnerability of specific sites, and then there's the sensitivity or materiality. And we have to look at all those things to convince a building owner that they need to do something that is resilient. So just in terms of, again, going back to Hurricane Harvey, a client, you can see an empty space here in this open air shopping mall in Kingwood, Texas. This was in a FEMA low risk flood zone, but the modeling of heavy rainfall showed that this was a bathtub. We recommended that the client walk away from the site, which they did. We don't usually do that, but we did in this case. And about 8 months later, this was the drone footage of the shopping center where most of the lobbies took on 4 feet of water. So let's look at some drivers. What's coming at us that's going to perhaps help move the needle forward? One of them is the new risk rating 2.0. Currently, the only risk mitigation activities for which the NFIP gives credit for homeowners is elevating a structure. Commercial buildings can do some dry flood proofing, but now they're going to have, for risk mitigation, installing flood openings, elevating onto post piles and piers, elevating machinery and equipment above the lowest floor. So again, carrot and stick. It's a driver of resilience as these become socialized. Even at the SEC level, you have Gary Gensler, chairman of the CFTC, saying that they want to have a climate disclosure rule, and they're going to need to develop some rules of the road. That's going to take a while, but again, that should push things forward as a driver of resilience. And we heard from Karema and Katherine about the LEED and RELi program. That is certainly a major driver of resilience. Even the Environmental Bankers Association, kind of way out ahead of the lending community generally, is talking about inclusion of site-specific climate models appended to a phase 1 environmental site assessment for basic due diligence, portfolio-wide review of climate risk data, and in the event that these reports identify concerns, field observations by building engineers and design professionals. And then finally, and this is ongoing now, the ASTM has a new committee for a guide and a standard for property risk and resilient assessments with 4 different phases or levels, from hazard screening to vulnerability evaluation to customized resilience and advanced resilience engineering. So look, probably everybody here in the audience knows that we're all in the same leaky climate boat. It's not going to get any better anytime soon. So we have to pick up our oars, and all of these stakeholders, all of these oars people, from the government, public infrastructure, to commercial real estate, to residential, banking, insurance, they each have jobs to do. And we have to get going on this, and each one has their jobs cut out for them. But again, right now, it's just painfully slow. And I continue to be optimistic that together we can achieve a resilient future. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Beth has all of our contact information if you need anything more from me.
I do. Thank you so much, Albert. I really appreciate that. As we talked about, I love seeing the way that different tools come together and how we can think about applying them in work. And then I really appreciated those slides at the end of just what do we see coming down the line, things from FEMA, from SEC, from EBA, and just kind of all corners converging on the idea that this is a moment that we ought to be coming into that can be driving change. So I want to ask all of our panelists to come back on with a video. We have about 10 minutes for questions and conversation, and so I want to tee us up with one question for the group, which we've been discussing in the planning phase for this webinar, and then I'm going to turn to some of the questions that have come in through the chat to sprinkle those to all of you. But just to begin with, we are talking about some really terrific leading practices, and we know that they're certainly the vanguard, which you're all part of, but how do we bring these practices to being the norm? And how are we going to use entities like, USGBC here as a co-sponsor and ASAP here as a co-sponsor? I would just love to hear, beginning with you, Karema, and then, from the other panelists, what is the role that we can play in our professional organizations and as professionals of this field to really scale these kinds of best practices to being all practices?
Thank you, Beth. That was a great question. And I have to say, thank you to all the speakers. Those presentations were phenomenal. I have to commend Albert for the response to your question, for sharing that slide about the Environmental Bankers Association. I actually took a picture of it and sent it to my partner, who is an underwriter. And I think that's really where the engagement needs to happen, is with banking professionals. And at USGBC, we're starting to recognize, well, we have been recognizing that, but we're trying to connect more with banks in terms of engagement on resilience specifically. We do have quite a few members of the USGBC community who are banks and financial institutions, but really engaging those stakeholders in this conversation and making sure that they're understanding of what we're up against here and the amount of risk and how they need to integrate it into their processes. I think that's really important, engaging financial institutions, because they're the ones who are financing these projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think it's going to be engaging the insurance professionals, because they're the ones having to pay out. And as they lose money, they're going to look at what their investments are, what the risk level is, and understanding the risk and mitigating to that risk. And I think that's where third-party certification comes in, is they're saying, well, how can you prove to me that you've mitigated your risk? And to say, we have a RELi certification at the silver level, then that might get you one cost for insurance or one type of insurance product. But if you're certified at the platinum level, that might get you a different insurance product. So what I think we're both saying, and Karema, very good comments, is that sometimes you have to hit people financially at the beginning of a project, which gets to insurance and financing, because everybody's waiting until the end and crossing their fingers that they're not going to be the building or the project that is hit by an environmental disaster.
Yeah, I just want to give Albert and Doug an opportunity to step into this before we start pulling some questions out of the chat and Q&A.
I'll add a little bit. The finance piece is really important. And I agree exactly with Karema and Katherine. I'll add a slightly different, another perspective to it. So as the architect, planner position, the key is to actually get the things that you need and want to do around resilience into the project before the budget is set. So it's still back to finance. I'm working on a project right now. It's $100 million medical clinic project, and the race is on. We're all racing to get the criteria established, not just for resilience, but for everything before the cost estimator mints the first cost estimate. Because once that happens, and if your issues aren't on the table and they're not in, once that settles, the dust goes away, it's over, it's not in. So it's even more, that's more true about resilience in my mind, because it's a new enough topic that it takes some time for people to get a hold of it, blend it into their brain, and make it part of what they're up to. So from that perspective, that finance piece and catching it early, which is about the bankers and the insurance and everything, is key.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's a really good point. Just to, and I won't be long with this, Beth, but when you think about what a property condition assessment is, it's with every commercial real estate transaction that takes place in the country. And somebody goes up on the roof or take a look at the roof, and they say what the remaining useful life is. And let's say that if it was a brand new roof, the useful life would be 30 years. But so looking ahead 30 years is not something that should set your hair on fire. It's a standard part of real estate transfers in the United States. But some buildings will be surrounded by water in 30 years. So they're multifamily, coastal multifamily, commercial buildings, supermarkets, industry. So if it's okay to look at a roof and to estimate its remaining useful life in the real estate property transfer, we also need to socialize the concept that climate change, sea level rise, more extreme weather, Doug talked about enlarging roof drains. All these things have to be factored in, but they're not yet. And so it has to be socialized and it brought in at the pace in which the systems will accept this, because we are not at the present time have true legal regulatory drivers to change behaviors.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate those responses. And I'm gonna, quickly, this is a question that came in for Doug. I think it speaks to some of what you were saying, Albert. There's a question that was there a specific event that catalyzed the resiliency charrette in Christus Spohn? And how much are you seeing an uptake of this kind of activity? I used to feel like people only worked on adaptation and resilience if they've suffered already an impact. Where are you seeing proactive action taking place, or are you?
Right. Yes and no. It's both, actually. So the first question about what facilitated the Christus Spohn charrette, you were exactly right. The CEO, the folks that were there, had been part of Hurricane Irma, not to be confused with Ida. They were building a new hospital, and they knew they had an issue. So they were primed and ready for it. Now, to the second piece, are we seeing more uptick in activity? I think this actually comes down to those of us, and I'm speaking to a bunch of professionals here that are doing resilience, but in my experience, and probably yours, it's us sometimes bringing it to the table. And the key, I'm going to sound like a broken record, is to get it on the table early. That's absolutely essential. And I have a little rule of thumb that I use. Doesn't always work, but I think it works about 50% of the time. I get my issues on the table, I take my nose, and then I bring them back again. And I need about 6 weeks for that cycle to work. So you got to get it in there, get it on the table, and then sort of have time to talk with folks, let their brains marinate on it. That's one. The other strategy is to put it on the table after you've done your homework. So Albert's got great tools, right? So use those tools early, then come to the owner and say, these are some issues you have, and here's the backup information on it, or here's the likely cost. So as a practitioner, I'm kind of always fighting to figure out how to deal with the now and the present. And I think our approaches and our techniques about how we do it, we just need to continue to refine those.
Thank you. And I just want to call out a comment that Karema just put. And Karema, why don't you just share with us the comment that you just put in the chat? Because I think it's really essential that this message is being heard.
Sure thing. Yeah, thank you. I wanted to say that think it's also important to note that we have to educate and socialize people on the idea that sustainability and resilience and equity and social equity are not separate topics, but in fact, they're very intimately intertwined. And as I heard from an NAACP event, this is one of my favorite quotes, sustainability without equity is sustaining inequity. And so if we realize that and realize that the most vulnerable people or the frontline communities that are being impacted the most are Black and Brown people, then we will be able to tackle this problem in a more efficient and effective way.
Awesome.
Well, and I think you're right. A lot of it's done at a local level. It's done at a community level. Mm-hmm. And so that's why you've got to engage the community around you. I mean, the hospital that Doug talked about is not going to be that resilient unless a community around it is resilient, unless people can get to the hospital, which means the roads around it have to be resilient. The services have to be resilient. That wastewater treatment plant may need to upgrade to ensure resilience. I mean, it is a community effort.
Mm-hmm. So I know that we could have this conversation go on and on, but I'm going to wrap us up at this point and bring us towards the conclusion of our webinar today. I want to thank our experts who joined us, Karema, Seliem, Katherine, Hammack, Doug Pierce, Albert Slapp. Thank you all so much for bringing and lending your expertise to this conversation. We will be sharing the contact information for our speakers and our slide decks as much as they are shareable and public information already will go out. And then the recording from this webinar will be available within the next week on the ASAP website and on our YouTube channel. For folks who want to continue connecting with the conversations like these and want to make sure to stay in the know about upcoming sessions, you're welcome to check out our schedule of events on the ASAP calendar. We do have our network meeting coming in 2 weeks. That Service Providers Academy I spoke about at the beginning coming up in October. And our November co-creation series will be highlighting designing the utilities of the future, the work that's happening in the water sector. If you have an idea for a co-creation series, if you have a program or project that you're working on that you would like to bring to the community to share how you're advancing climate adaptation and resilience, please feel free to reach out to me directly, or you can use the forms that should be getting shared in the chat now. And if you're not already an ASAP member, I encourage you to join us. When you become an ASAP member, you have access to the resources as well as the network of professionals who are tackling climate change challenges every day, just like you. Conversations like these are taking place on a weekly basis across our network of members made up of individuals and organizations who are working to advance the climate adaptation and resilience field. So I hope that you'll consider joining us as an individual or as a company. And if you have any questions about how to join ASAP, if you'd like to learn more, or if you have anything you want to just reach out and chat about in your adaptation work, don't hesitate to contact me directly or reach us through our website. Thank you again to our speakers who joined us today, and thanks for all of you. Questions will be captured through the chat and through Q&A, and we'll give folks an opportunity to respond to those via email if they're available to. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to seeing you at our next session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.